Hi everyone! In this video we are making a handmade mini album just using paper and cardboard. This tutorial is just for the cover, and in my other videos I'll show you how to make awesome page inserts. What you'll need are some gorgeous papers of your choice. I'm using this paper pack from the brand Prima Marketing. I love the vintage Western designs and I got all of this on scrapbook.com, but you can find an abundance of paper at any craft store. I also got these correlating stickers, ephemera pieces, and charms, which I'll mainly be using in the page inserts. You'll want to pick out a design you want for your front and back album cover and also the spine of your book. For the front and back cover of my album, I chose this paper with this sort of tribal pattern on it, and for the spine of my book, I'm using this black and white plaid pattern paper. You can use any type of design you'd like, but keep in mind that the paper you're using for the spine will be covering up some of the front and back cover designs, so just keep that in mind when you're picking out paper. The album I am making is 8 by 8 inches. You absolutely can make your album bigger or smaller if you want to, but if so, you'll want to adjust the rest of the measurements. So what you will need is some chipboard. I found these on Amazon and will link these below. And the paper we just picked out. I'm using Mod Podge to adhere everything, but you can also use double-sided adhesive. I wouldn't recommend regular glue because it's really thick and you can get air bubbles. You'll also need some type of paper trimmer or scissors, and the paper trimmer makes it really easy to measure and cut at the same time. The first thing we are doing is cutting down our chipboard for the front and back cover. So we are cutting down 2 chipboard pieces to be 8 inches by 8 inches. I'm using this paper trimmer to cut really straight lines, and because chipboard is kind of thick, you may want to cut on both of the front and back of it. Now on to the second piece of chipboard. We are doing the same exact thing. It really can't get much simpler than this. Next part is to cut the spine of the album out. For mine, I chose to do 3 by 8 inches. Again, you can absolutely make it wider or smaller depending on how many pages you want in your album. I think this is a great size, especially for beginners, and I'm just using a scrap piece of chipboard from another mini album I made and cutting it down to 3 by 8 inches. And this is all the chipboard you need, just those 3 pieces. This is also a great way to recycle if you have any chipboard sitting around your house from mailing packages or whatnot. Just make sure it is sturdy and smooth. Next up, we are cutting our paper to go around our chipboard pieces. So take the 2 patterns you picked for the front and back cover, and we are cutting both of those down to 10 by 10 inches. So our chipboard, we cut 8 by 8 inches, and our paper is going to be 10 by 10 inches. I just added 2 inches, that way we have enough room to wrap the paper around the entirety of the chipboard, which I'll show after this. Now the paper that is going to cover the spine is really important because it's going to hold both the covers together. I made the mistake writing it down wrong, and instead of 5 by 10 inches, it should be 8 by 10 inches. The reason it needs to be wider is because we are attaching both the front and the back cover to that piece, which I will also demonstrate in a bit. That's why earlier I also said you'll want to pick a paper pattern that you won't mind if it gets covered a bit. The next step is to adhere the paper to the chipboard so we have a really pretty album cover. I'm using Mod Podge to adhere it on, but you can also use double-sided adhesive. It's totally up to you. I'm just putting a smooth layer of Mod Podge all around and making sure the entirety of the chipboard is covered, especially the corners and the edges. That way it sticks on really nicely throughout the entire cover. And once I have it covered, I'm going to lay it down on the back side of the paper I'm using, and you'll want to smooth it down really nicely. I like to use a bone folder, and I also like to use my hand as well, just to make sure it's even and pressed down securely. Make sure to go over any tiny air bubbles and that the paper is laid down flat, especially around the edges. Once everything is adhered nicely, set that aside to dry, and we're going to do the back cover now. So the same exact thing, get the Mod Podge all over the chipboard, press it down on the patterned paper, and then smooth everything out to make sure that it's nice and even. After I let them sit and dry for a bit, now is when we're going to wrap the edges so absolutely no cardboard will show through. A helpful way to get flat, crisp edges is to fold the extra paper hanging over using the tabletop. Here I'm going around all 4 sides and folding the paper over the sides of the chipboard. Once you fold all 4 sides, you'll have a nice defined crease, and the next step before we adhere the extra paper to the back of the chipboard is to cut the corners. This step is essential because if you don't do this, the corners of the album will be lumpy and uneven and just won't look good. So I'm going to go around each of the 4 corners and cut them off, leaving just about a millimeter of space. You don't want to cut directly to the corner of the chipboard, or else there will be no paper to cover that corner, and so the chipboard will peek through, which isn't a huge deal if you accidentally cut too close, but it just makes for a much polished look if those corners are covered. Here we are finally adhering the extra paper hanging off to the back side of the chipboard. Again, just taking the Mod Podge or tape, whichever you are using, and doing one side at a time. So I'm putting Mod Podge all over one flap, and once I have that even and covered, I'm going to fold it over and adhere it to the chipboard like so. And because we previously created those folds or creases, it makes the step much easier. Now here is where leaving that 1mm piece of paper from the corners comes in handy. You're going to fold that paper around the corner of the chipboard. Again, it's not much paper, but I'm just going around and making sure no corner of the chipboard peeks through. And once you have done that, we're doing the exact same thing we did to our first flap. So I'm putting a layer of Mod Podge on, folding it over, and adhering it to the back of the chipboard. And next we're just going to go around and do the exact same thing to each side. So now we have one of the front covers of a chipboard fully covered, and you'll just want to do that with your second 8x8 chipboard piece. And here is how they'll both look. Next, we are doing the spine of the book, which is a little bit different than the front and back covers. I'm first putting an even layer of Mod Podge all over the chipboard piece like I had done with the cover pieces. Next, place the chipboard right in the middle of the piece of paper. This is where having a mat like I have will come in handy because it will help measure how many inches should be left on each side. If you don't have this type of mat, just use a typical ruler, and if you are off a few centimeters, it's not that big of a deal, but try to get it as centered as possible. After the chipboard is stuck down, here is where we will attach the front and back cover piece. On the left-hand side, the front cover is going to go down, and the key trick to spacing is using the width of 2 chipboard pieces. That way there's enough space for the album to fold open and close. Because if you put the cover piece right up against the spine, you won't be able to easily open or close it. So again, just the width of 2 chipboard pieces. I found it easiest to put the Mod Podge down first, and then place the 2 chipboard pieces against the spine for the spacing, and finally adhere down the cover. It's okay if there's Mod Podge in areas that the cover won't go over because it will dry clear and you can finally start to see the album coming together, which is so exciting. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with the back cover, again putting Mod Podge down, doing the spacing, and adhering the cover down. Let that dry just a little bit, then you can fold it and see just how nice it looks. We'll also want to fold over and adhere the top and bottom pieces of the extra paper that are left. So just like I did before, folding it over the table, then I'll go ahead and use Mod Podge to adhere it down. I now realize that the length of the spine paper could have been a little bit longer so that there was more paper to fold over and secure it with, but it's totally fine how it is, and it won't matter because the next step is to cover the inside of the front and back cover where you see the extra chipboard. Pick out 2 pieces of paper for the inside covers. I really loved this cactus one. I cut it the same size as the chipboard, so 8 inches by 8 inches so that it covers the entirety of the inside covers. And you guessed it, I'm using Mod Podge again to adhere the cactus paper to the insides. The good news is that we're almost done, but I also left what I think is the hardest part in my opinion. Obviously, you'll want to have pages for your mini album, so we'll need something that can hold those pages, and this part is making an accordion style insert that will hold those pages of the album. You may want to watch this part a few times to really understand what I'm doing, but the best way to explain it is much like how an accordion has peaks. And those peaks will be holding the paper inserts that we will be making in other videos of this series. You can see with this orange marker, I am marking where all the peaks will be, and each peak, as you can see, is an inch, which will be folded in half, so it will be half an inch. And between each peak is a valley, which I am coding in blue, and the valleys are important because it gives space between each of the peaks where your pages will go. To make this, I'm just taking a regular 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and trimming it down to 8 by 11 inches. Now I'm going off of the measurements I wrote down. I'm going to score each measurement. I'm sorry, the measurements are cut off, so you'll want to screenshot or write it down yourself, all of the measurements on that card. But here I'm just scoring all the places I have written down. Now that I have scored all the measurements, there is some extra space that I didn't use, so I'm just trimming that off where the last score line is. Next, we'll want to fold those peaks. So we're going to fold over the very first score line you see. If you remember from my paper of measurements, this is a valley and not a peak. So once that is folded, we're going to fold over the second score line in the opposite direction than what we folded the first time. So if you folded the first score line inward, fold the second score line outward, and once you do this, you can see your very first peak. Once you have your first peak, the area that comes after it to the third score line is also another valley. So you leave that and don't fold it in any direction, but the peak after that, which is the fourth score line, is going to be your second peak. So fold over the fourth score line, and once you see the 2 peaks, you can start seeing a pattern forming. So it goes valley, peak, peak. So the 5th score line do not fold, the 6th score line you do fold over to create the third peak, and so on and so forth. So go ahead and follow that pattern till you reach the end of the paper. Now that we have all of the score lines that we need to folded, next I'm going to glue and tape the peaks together. On the inside of the peaks where you can see it makes a V shape, just tape the sides together on the inside like I'm demonstrating here. I'm using both glue and tape just to get that extra hold, but it's absolutely not necessary to use both. So again, using the tape and glue, I'm combining the V shape, or the peak if you want to call it. Make sure to press it together hard so they don't come apart, and then let the glue dry just for a bit. Once all the peaks are glued together, you can see that the valleys make it lay flat. So now I'm going to glue it on to the inside spine of our album where all the pages will be inserted. I'm using both double-sided adhesive and glue again in order to adhere the insert. Once you include all your pages in here, it will make it a little bit heavier, so I'm just making sure there's enough to hold everything intact for the future and so that the book will last for a long time. We're almost finished. The last thing to do is place the accordion style insert onto the spine. To make sure that it lays flat, I'm pressing it down and using my bone folder again to ensure the spaces or the valleys are nice and secure and flat. For finishing touches, one thing I like to do is cut the tops and bottoms of the peaks at an angle. That way, when you insert your pages, you don't see the peak in the middle, so I'm just taking regular scissors and cutting each one at an angle like so. And here is the final album cover. To see some fun scrapbook inserts for this album, subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos in this mini album series. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you found this tutorial helpful.